The town called it cursed long before Maya ever knew its address. A crumbling desert mansion no one dared to touch, a place teenagers whispered about and grown men crossed the street to avoid. When the lawyer's voice told her it was hers, Maya thought it was a mistake, just another cruel misunderstanding life liked to throw at struggling women. She was 32, exhausted from 3 jobs and raising 9-year-old Sophie in a leaking trailer that baked like an oven in summer. People in Desert Springs measured worth by shiny trucks and clean facades, and Maya had neither. The diner regulars whispered when she passed. The school moms smiled with pity. Yet none of them saw how Sophie looked at her at night, eyes full of quiet faith, whispering dreams of gardens and birthday cakes that didn't come from a box. When Maya drove up Mirage Canyon Road for the first time, dust coating her windshield and doubt weighing on her chest, she expected ruins. What she found was worse and somehow more alive. Broken windows gaped like empty eyes. Rusted gates sagged in defeat. Still, Sophie stepped out clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit and said softly, "Mama, this could be our dream house." Maya wanted to believe her. She wanted to be brave. But as she unlocked the giant steel-plated doors with trembling hands, she had no idea that behind this decay slept a secret powerful enough to tear open decades of silence and change their lives forever. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole. Maya's phone flashlight cut shaky lines across dust-choked marble, shattered chandeliers, and the bones of old luxury. Every step echoed like a warning. Where glamour once ruled, gravity now pressed heavy with abandonment. Sophie wandered wide-eyed, pointing at murals buried under grime and whispering what each room could become. Maya followed more cautiously, counting unstable steps and dangerous drops, her mother's fear louder than every ghost story she'd ever heard. The kitchen looked like a battlefield of time. Broken cabinets, relic-colored ovens, and spiders owning the corners where chefs once cooked for legends. In the master suite, water-stained walls framed built-in shelves where swollen books lay forgotten. But it was the basement stairs that made Maya's heart slow. Not fear, instinct. The concrete steps dropped into a blackness that felt deliberate, not accidental. When Sophie ran her hand across the wall and said it felt wrong, Maya listened. Behind a carefully smoothed section of plaster, the sound was different, solid. Heavy, hidden, a sealed door disguised as part of the wall. That night, long after Sophie slept curled beside her in the trailer, Maya returned alone with borrowed tools and a courage she didn't know she owned. One crack of the crowbar broke more than plaster. It shattered the boundaries of the life she'd known. Brick after brick fell away, revealing a chamber built not for storage, but for preservation. What waited inside did not belong to ghosts. It belonged to history, danger, and unimaginable value. The room glowed under her flashlight like a forbidden museum. Climate-controlled cases lined the walls with surgical precision. Inside them rested treasures the world believed lost forever. Original master recordings, handwritten sheet music, stage-worn suits, private photographs, letters between legends and presidents. Maya's knees weakened as understanding crashed over her. This was not inheritance. This was curation of a buried kingdom. At the center sat a vintage reel-to-reel console draped with a cloth like an altar. A trembling hand uncovered it, revealing a tape still threaded and waiting. When power hummed through the machine and a familiar voice filled the chamber, Maya slid to the floor, breath stolen from her chest. The voice spoke calmly, confession woven into every word. A story of threats, forced silence, and secrets locked away for survival. The room was an insurance policy built against powerful men who erased history as easily as they rewrote it. As the recording ended, Maya understood that the house hadn't been cursed at all. It had been guarding something too dangerous to lose. In a crawl space behind the main chamber, she found a final letter written in elegant, tired hands. It explained everything. Why the collection had been hidden, why it had been protected for decades, and why, after a lifetime of silence, it had been entrusted to a woman with almost nothing to lose and everything to protect. Maya drove home that night in stunned silence, carrying a truth no poor, invisible waitress was ever meant to hold. And before sunrise, the first message arrived from a stranger who already knew too much. Threat followed discovery like a shadow that learned her name. The security camera at the mansion was destroyed. Fresh tire tracks scarred the dust, and across the steel-plated door, red words bled against the desert beige. Some secrets stay buried. Maya didn't need anyone to translate the warning. Within days, her daughter's school was targeted with complaints meant to pry Sophie from her stability. A wealthy developer with a polished smile and a dangerous family history offered to buy the problem away. When Maya refused, pressure replaced persuasion, yet something unexpected happened. Help arrived. A seasoned attorney, museum curators, authentication experts, former law enforcement, and quietly the attention of people who had waited decades for this truth to surface. As the collection's value was formally assessed, numbers soaring beyond anything Maya could comprehend, fear shifted into resolve. This wasn't just money. This was evidence. This was legacy. This was proof the past could no longer be edited by threat. When the FBI joined the process and journalists prepared to shine light on every document, Maya felt the narrative flip. She was no longer hunted prey. She was the guardian of a story too large to be silenced. Still, at night, fear returned in whispers. She watched Sophie sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit with absolute trust in the woman beside her. Maya knew that every choice she made now carried a sharper edge. Safety demanded silence. Truth demanded courage, and neither path came without sacrifice. Preparation for the public unveiling became a race against men who thrived in shadows. Items were moved under escort, evidence documented with obsessive care. Every letter, every tape, every fragile page handled like a heartbeat that could stop at any wrong touch. The mansion that once stood abandoned became a fortress of motion sensors, cameras, and quiet men who watched without blinking. Yet intimidation did not stop. Anonymous messages arrived. Lawsuits were hinted. Offers doubled, then tripled. Maya refused them all. She wasn't fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for meaning. On the eve of the press conference, alone in the secret chamber once more, she stood surrounded by the history Dorothy had protected with her life. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to grieve for that unseen woman who carried fear in silence for 35 years. She whispered a promise into the climate-controlled air. I won't hide this anymore. Outside, the desert wind brushed against the mansion like a breath held too long. At dawn, armored vehicles would transport the collection to the world that forgot it. At noon, cameras would erase 5 decades of forced darkness. And by nightfall, Maya and Sophie would no longer be invisible. That realization terrified her more than any threat ever had. The press conference exploded across headlines within minutes. A struggling single mother turned reluctant gatekeeper of one of the most valuable hidden collections in modern history. Museum officials explained the artifacts. Federal agents confirmed the evidence. Journalists connected the long-erased dots of influence, intimidation, and power. As the world watched, men who believed time had buried their past realized that time had only matured its consequences. And through it all, Maya stood at the podium with a trembling voice that never fully broke. She spoke not of fortune, but of trust. Of a woman named Dorothy who carried a truth when no one else could. Of a voice that had been forced into silence and finally allowed to be heard again. Threats turned into court filings. Pressure turned into scrutiny. And scrutiny turned into protection. The louder the truth became, the safer Maya grew. At home that night, Sophie watched the news in quiet fascination. "Mama," she said softly, "is that the treasure?" Maya held her close and answered honestly for the first time. "Yes, baby, but not the kind people think." Life did not change overnight, but it changed unmistakably. The trailer was replaced with a modest home near the school Sophie loved. Maya no longer juggled 3 jobs, but she still woke early, still packed lunches, still kissed scraped knees. Wealth hovered like an unfamiliar language. She was still learning to translate into safety rather than excess. The mansion remained under protection, destined to become a preserved exhibit instead of a forgotten threat. Lawsuits faded under evidence. Offers vanished under exposure. Powerful families retreated into public respectability, knowing the documents that could end them lived now under permanent scrutiny. Maya often visited the museum after hours, standing alone before the display that carried the weight of 50 silenced years. She no longer felt fear when she heard that voice echo through the gallery. She felt closure. Dorothy had not lived long enough to see this moment, but Maya whispered updates to her anyway, as if the brave woman could hear them through the walls of time she once guarded so fiercely. Years later, when Sophie walked through the exhibit as a teenager with friends who only half believed the story, she always stopped at the final display. Not the rarest artifact, not the most expensive contract, but the quiet photograph of an unknown woman labeled simply, "The Keeper of the Secret." Maya would stand beside her daughter and watch the younger generation learn that treasures are not always meant for pockets. They are meant for protection. The mansion was never cursed. It was patient. It waited for someone with enough fear to understand danger and enough love to defy it anyway. Maya never became the woman Desert Springs once judged her to be. She became the woman history needed when it finally demanded